Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. When we last left the book The Queen Mother, it was a time of celebration. Most of the kingdom loved the new king and queen, and the king and queen got used to their new roles and were really enjoying it. The only snag was the king's brother, the former king of England, Edward VIII. He was complaining. He was in Austria and he wanted to return to his home, get more money, and have his wife be titled HRH, Her Royal Highness. He was bothering the king and trying to give him advice, which was ironic since he stepped down from his role as king. So let us see what happens today. The end of October, the king had to preside over his first opening of Parliament. He was a bit anxious to have to read his speech from the throne. He was to make a speech about the government priorities he wanted to do, and the queen was anxious too. She felt it went off well. She told Queen Mary in a letter, "I must admit that I was very, very nervous during the whole ceremonial," but she appreciated the way in which the speech demonstrated the link between the crown and Parliament. In early December, the Queen went to a private lunch party with friends. She really enjoyed herself. The party was hosted by Hannah Gubbe, and one of the guests was Osbert Sitwell. He gave her a book on gardens, and she thanked him and told him how much she appreciated his loyal friendship. She told him she loved his writing and asked him to write us something hopeful and courageous for the next year. After all, this is a grand little country, and as we can never be warlike, let us at least have some pride in it. We must be serious about something. Before Christmas, the Queen sent the Duke of Windsor a present, a set of antique dessert knives and forks with porcelain handles. In a letter accompanying it, she hoped that perhaps they might appeal to you, who like old things. Anyway, best wishes for Christmas and the New Year, of health and happiness to you both. With love, Elizabeth. So I was surprised that she sent a gift. I thought that once that Edward stepped down, all communication was over with him. But the letter wasn't included with the package, so the Duke was puzzled at who'd sent it to him. He wrote saying he assumed he must have been sent the present in error, and he offered to return it. The Queen was embarrassed and answered him at once. "Darling David, when I received your little note this morning, I rushed to my writing table, and after hunting about amongst the letters on it, I found the lost letter. I'm furious and disappointed because I addressed it and it was ready to post, and I have no idea what could have happened. You must have thought it very odd." And the Duke replied that he was surprised to get any gift. He said, "Since your note of November 23rd, 1936, in which you stated that we both uphold you always, so many things have happened to contradict this statement, things which I know from my own experience as king lay in Bertie's power to prevent. And that is not easy to believe that we are the recipients of so beautiful a gift. At the same time, we both appreciate and thank you for your thought of us." So it sounds like he was taking a jab at his brother in that statement. Well, the Queen got the flu in the New Year, and Princess Elizabeth had the flu too. I think they were separated at this time. The princesses were in Sandringham, and the Queen was probably at the palace. So they wrote to each other from their sick beds. The Queen wrote her daughter, "My darling angel, thank you so very much for your dear little letter. I believe that I've got the same disease as you have, only I was sick and you felt sick. So I hope that your throat is better, and drink plenty of orange juice with the plain water mixed." The Queen wrote her daughter the next day and said she was glad the princess was feeling better too, and the Queen said that she was living on tea. She wrote, "I hope by tomorrow that I shall be eating Irish stew, steak and kidney pudding, hard-cut mutton, roast beef, boiled beef, sausages and mutton pies, not to mention roast chicken, scrambled chicken, scrunched up chicken, good chicken, nasty chicken, and fat chilled chicken, thin chicken, any sort of chicken." I can't blame her there. So during this time, Hitler was starting to take power. He took over Austria, and Czechoslovakia was the next country to be threatened. The King and the Queen were making plans at that time for their first state visit. President Lebrun of France, which was Britain's principal democratic ally in Europe, had invited them to Paris at the end of June. It was a visit to show the strength of the renewed monarchy and to show the strength of England and France in the face of German and Italian threats. It would be the first British state visit since King George V and Queen Mary in April 1914, and that was only a few weeks before both countries were at war with Germany. While the King and Queen were getting prepared for their visit to France, the Queen's mother was declining in her health. She had been ill for months, and part of the time she had to stay in London and a nursing home. The Queen would visit her frequently, and Lady Strathmore was moved back to the family home in Bruton Street, but got weaker through the summer of 1938. On June 22nd, her condition worsened. The Queen, her father, the King, and other members of the family gathered at Lady Strathmore's bedside, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, June 23rd, she died. Queen Elizabeth had often said that she dreaded this moment since childhood. Now it had happened, she found it hard to grasp. The Queen wrote to the Archbishop of Canterbury, "My mother was so much the pivot of the family, so vital and so loving and so marvelously loyal to those she loved or the things she thought right. An angel of goodness and fun." The Queen got hundreds of letters of condolences from people all over the world who had been touched by her mother. The Duke of Windsor sent a telegram saying, "Sincere sympathy in your great loss, David." So this all happened 5 days before the trip to France. The governments of both countries were anxious not to cancel the visit. It was thought that the Queen could stay home and the King could make the trip alone. The Queen was determined to accompany the King as she had promised. President Lebrun suggested it be postponed for 3 weeks, and they all agreed to that. The Queen concealed her misery and traveled with the King to Glamis on June 25th. In her childhood home, she and other members of the family sat together for a time in her mother's sitting room, and she found comfort even in that. The funeral began with a short private service in the chapel where the family had worshipped all their lives. She found it exquisite in its simplicity and beauty. The coffin was transported by farm cart to the burial ground half a mile away, followed by a long line of mourners, including the King. The Queen and her father, who was calm and buoyed by his religious faith, came in a car. While they were at the graveside, there were torrents of rain on the mourners. The King convinced his wife and father-in-law to remain in the car while he helped carry the wreaths to the graveside. The princesses stayed in London, but they had given a cross of white carnations and blue irises. The Queen and her father then joined the King, and they stood in the wind and rain for the service of committal taken by the Bishop of St. Andrews. The Queen liked the wildness. The elements taking a part made the whole mournful affair less agonizing. Afterwards, she and the King went north to rest at Birk Hall. The Queen, alone with her husband in the mountains and woods, received and wrote many letters. She told Queen Mary that her mother had had a real sense of perspective. She gave things their due importance, and the things that did not matter were relegated to the background. That is so rare in women, and a great gift. She assured her mother-in-law, "You have it very strongly, darling mamma." Birk Hall had brought a solace to the Queen. She climbed 1 or 2 mountains and spent her days amongst them, and felt, according to a letter she wrote, "They are so nice and big and everlasting, and such a lovely color." She picked a spray of bell heather to send to her daughters. After a few days of peace, they went back to London to prepare for Paris. The Queen had to make serious decisions about her wardrobe. She was in mourning, and the colored dresses weren't suitable. She thought of wearing only black and purple. Hartnell pointed out an alternative. White was also the color of royal mourning. After all, Queen Victoria insisted on a white funeral. White was a bold proposal. After some discussions, the King and Queen agreed instead of black, the Queen would be all in white. The Queen had to have endless new fittings, but it was worth the trouble. The new dresses were exquisite, and their effect mesmerizing. After that, Hartnell became the official court dressmaker to Queen Elizabeth, designing all her important outfits for the next 4 decades. July 19th, the King and Queen, dressed in black, and got on board the Admiralty yacht Enchantress, which was at Dover. They crossed the Channel in thick mist, escorted by 8 E-class destroyers and an air escort of 18 Anson planes. In mid-channel, they were received by 7 French destroyers, all flying the Union flag at their masthead, and the fleet made its way to Boulogne. From there was a royal party to the train to Paris. It was a city the Queen had loved since she visited there as a young woman. While they were on the train, the Queen changed and appeared in her first of Hartnell's dazzling white creations, a 2-piece dress and coat edged with silver fox. From that moment, she captured Paris. A 101-gun salute welcomed them, and thousands of white doves were released. From the Eiffel Tower flew the largest Union Jack flag ever made, measuring 1,500 square yards. Public buildings were lavishly decorated, and tens of thousands of shops and homes displayed the flags of the two countries and photographs of the king and queen. In deference to the queen's ancestry, the Loch Ness Monster made an appearance on the Seine. Special apartments had been decorated for them. It was near the French Foreign Ministry, overlooking the river, at a cost of 8 million francs. Paintings and furnitures and tapestries were brought from the Louvre and the palaces of Versailles, Fontainebleau, and Chantilly. The queen's bed had belonged to Marie Antoinette, the king's to Napoleon. Silk had been specially woven for the walls of the queen's room, and the chef from the Hotel Crillon came to cook for them in an electric kitchen built for their visit. Luxurious modern bathrooms had been installed, one silver, the other gold. A few years later, during Nazi occupation, Field Marshal Göring was reported to have filled what had been the king's dressing room with cupboards for hundreds of uniforms. The atmosphere in France was joyous, almost like the Jubilee or the Coronation. Cheering crowds greeted the king and queen everywhere they went. The French went mad about the king and queen. President Lebrun and his wife were charming. The queen said everywhere she went the French hardly talked to her about the English. It was all Scottish and Scotland that they seemed interested in. She said she tried to talk as much as she could in French, but when I was stuck for a word, I just put my hand upon my heart, and they supplied me with one. The visit was a triumph for them both, but in particular for the queen. One French newspaper said, "We have taken the queen to our hearts. She rules over 2 nations." On the final day of the visit, they were entertained at Versailles at Louis XIV's magnificent palace. They reviewed 50,000 French soldiers as they marched past the king. Churchill was much moved and spoke of the French troops as a bulwark of European freedom. Then there was a flyby in which the French Air Force was to fly over them, but it was delayed until the afternoon and took place during a concert in the chapel of the palace. Suddenly the music was interrupted by the roars of wave after wave of military planes passing overhead. It wasn't reassuring, and the display was unsettling. That was the memory of the king and the queen, about when they thought about it later. On the last night, the royal couple enjoyed many curtain calls on the balcony of the Quai d'Orsay, as thousands of people in the streets below demanded by their cheers to see them. The French love affair with the queen and her husband were intense. During the holiday, the princesses had lessons every morning and then rode their ponies, and then they went to lunch. After tea back at the house, the princesses sometimes played the radio gramophone in the drawing room, or there was cricket on the lawn, and at 7 the house party changed for dinner. By 1938, Hitler was threatening Czechoslovakia, and the French made it clear that they would abide by their treaty commitments to Czechoslovakia. If France went to war, Britain would be dragged in. Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister, decided to fly and see Hitler. The king decided that he should return to the capital, and on September 14th he took the night train from Ballater. Queen Mary approved. She felt that the public took confidence if the king was in residence. Queen Mary said she was shocked by Hitler's speech. She said, "I was horrified at his voice and shouting and at what he said, so theatrical and awful." Over the next 10 days, Chamberlain made not 1, but 3 visits to Germany in desperate attempts to gain favor of the dictator. In this he had the gratitude and support of the vast majority of the British people and of their king and queen. The king was trying to keep the queen calm, and she felt like she should be with him. He said it might make the people nervous if she left her holiday to return to the palace. He said he would keep her informed of how things were going, and he told her to carry on as usual. Chamberlain sent papers to the minutes of Sunday's cabinet meeting, and he gave his impressions of Hitler. He wished he could have gotten more out of him, and the king told the queen, but perhaps that would happen when Chamberlain returned the following Wednesday. The queen missed the king and thought she should be in London at such a time. On September 21st, he traveled south, leaving the princesses at Balmoral. It was only supposed to be a short trip, but the king was under such a strain she stayed away longer than she'd planned. So London was turning grim. Air raid precautions were put into effect on September 25th. Cellars and basements were commandeered. Hospitals cleared for war wounded. School children crowded the railway stations for evacuations to the countryside. Trenches were dug in Hyde Park. Londoners were registered for gas mask distribution. Anti-aircraft guns were mounted on bridges close to Buckingham Palace. The king wanted to help in any way he could, and the king's private secretary suggested His Majesty send a personal appeal to Hitler as one ex-serviceman to another, and urge him to spare the youth of Europe another terrible war. The king brought up the idea to Chamberlain. He thought it would be unwise. He feared that Hitler might send an insulting reply. So I'm going to stop the video here. In this episode, it was shown that the king and queen hadn't totally cut the Duke of Windsor out of their lives, and the queen sent him a Christmas gift. She just forgot to send the letter she wrote with it, which confused Prince David. The queen's mother died, something she had dreaded since childhood, and the king and queen's trip to France was postponed to give the queen time to grieve. When they went to France 3 weeks later, the crowds were in love with them. They really were given the royal treatment there. Hitler started to make moves on Czechoslovakia, and that was a problem. France had signed a treaty with Czechoslovakia, and that meant they might go to war to help out the country. That also meant that England would go to war, too, if that happened, because they were committed to France. So it was an unsettling time for all. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would help out my channel. And I wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you.